Last Saturday, the 9th of October 2021, Leicester Diocesan Synod took a very significant decision. After a year of consultations right across the diocese, the Synod was asked to vote on a new framework for the diocese, simply under the title of Minster Communities. The vote in the end was a strong endorsement for this plan. 72% of Synod members voted in favour. But as part of that Synod, I set out a little bit of the reasons why we've had to look at this, something of the what are these Minster Communities, how we will go about implementing this decision, as well as the who and the when as well. So in this video, I want to set out a little bit of what I put to Synod and also make it clear what the next steps will be. The important starting point is the question of why. Why are we doing this? I want to start with a little story about a service that I was involved in a couple of weeks ago at Leicester Cathedral. It was the 250th anniversary service for Leicester Royal Infirmary. So in 1791, a group of people, including first and foremost a vicar in the local area, were involved in setting up a new hospital. There had never been a hospital in Leicester before that time. It was very, very small, just about, I think, 40 beds in total, 2 doctors, 2 nurses, 2 surgeons, a very small staff team. They had no running water in the hospital, so all the patients had to drink beer. Sounds fairly good. But they also had no anaesthetics and no medicines to speak of, so it was all very, very basic. But I was struck through that service in Leicester Cathedral that 250 years on, as we remembered the founding of the Leicester Royal Infirmary, the huge changes that have taken place in the way the hospital goes about its work, nevertheless don't mask the fact that the core purpose of the hospital remains unchanged. It was founded to care for people who were sick, to seek to bring them healing. That core purpose has not changed one iota since it was founded. And yet, with all the advancements of modern science and medicine and so on, the way it goes about doing its work has changed enormously. I was struck then about the similarities with what we're doing in the Diocese of Leicester. Our core purpose remains completely unchanged, but the way we go about living out that purpose changes as society around about us changes. So let's just be clear on that core purpose, that we exist as a Christian community in every local community across Leicester and Leicestershire. That is our aspiration, and that has not changed one iota. A Christian community in every local community where the Word of God is preached and the sacraments are duly administered. This has not changed. In baptism, the whole church is summoned to witness to God's love and to work for the coming of his kingdom. This has not changed. It remains our core purpose. To serve this royal priesthood, God has given particular ministries. You may know I'm quoting now from the ordination service. Priests are ordained to lead God's people in the offering of praise and the proclamation of the gospel. This has not changed. Deacons are ordained so that the people of God may be better equipped to make Christ known. This has not changed. Bishops are ordained to be shepherds of Christ's flock and guardians of the faith of the apostles, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and leading God's people in mission. This has not changed and will not change. And contrary to what some people have written in recent weeks, lay ministers are commissioned to assist in pastoral visiting, leading worship and burying the dead. This is written in the canons of the Church of England. It has not changed. It will not change. This is who we are. This is what we are trying to do. But, and there is of course a big but, society has changed enormously all around about us. People's expectations of the church have changed enormously, and therefore we need to think about how we go about proclaiming the gospel afresh in each generation. And that of course brings me to the subject of children and young people and how we pass on the faith to the next generation. I have 3 teenage children. They delight to speak a language that I cannot understand. That's just the way it is with teenagers. It always has been that way. in every generation. But yes, they use all sorts of words I don't understand. They talk a lingo that I don't understand, all connected now, of course, with computers and technology, all that sort of thing. It's a silly point, but it's to make a serious point, that the world has changed enormously for our children and young people, and this is where we have to face up to some hard facts. We have tiny numbers of children and young people in our churches now. That's the reality. I see it week by week as I travel around different churches that the numbers are tiny. And therefore we face a significant choice. We carry on as we are and just accept the fact that there are no children and young people in our churches, or we decide we're going to make some significant changes and put children and young people at the forefront, or indeed in the middle as Jesus did. Placing them in the middle and saying, unless you become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. That's why, within the proposal that we've developed for Minster Communities, we have suggested that every Minster community would have a stipendiary post that is focused on work with children and young people. Not so that we can say, oh, we've got this professional over here who will do all the work for us. No, far from it. That's been the mistake we've often made in the past. Rather, it's about saying, actually, how can we bring children and young people into the centre and make it a part of all that we do in the life of the church? Genuine intergenerational church, where different generations mix and work together. For me, it's about that question of how might children and young people lead our worship? How might children and young people teach us the faith, as well as us teaching them? Putting them central. That, to me, is a great vision behind what we are trying to do. Of course, there are other factors in thinking about why we're making these changes. We've heard very movingly in a number of places in recent weeks about the sort of stresses and strains which our clergy are feeling and our lay leaders likewise. Through this period of the pandemic and the lockdown, it's been particularly exaggerated. But we have to admit that it has been building for years, as we've asked clergy to do more and more, both in terms of taking on more parishes, but also in terms of various compliance, safeguarding, all these different things that are now needed and required. Somehow we need to find a way of lifting that burden from our clergy. And then, of course, added to all of that is our financial situation. We have not tried to hide the fact that we have a serious hole in our finances in the diocese at this moment in time. And we have no choice about the fact that we've got to address that. So this is the why. Why are we doing these changes? Then the what. I've mentioned already about a growing faith minister in each of the Minster communities. But essentially Minster communities then are all about churches, parish churches, fresh expressions of church, schools, all starting to work more and more closely together, brought together into a genuine community where people know one another and where people work together, even across their differences. Yes, this is about respecting the differences of parishes, the different traditions, different styles of worship, all respected, but nevertheless working together with people who may be very different as well. So a mixed ministry team supporting these Minster communities. Priests, stipendiary and non-stipendiary, deacons, pioneers, readers, pastoral workers, evangelists, a whole mix of different sorts of ministries, but it's worth saying with an ever greater emphasis on self-supporting ministry. So I've asked our vocations team already to start to shift the work of some of their vocations work to focus more and more on self-supporting or non-stipendiary ministry. The only way any of this is going to work, we know, is to ensure that we have more and more non-stipendiary ministers, such that every church community can have its own minister while still being supported by other ministers from the wider Minster community. A brief word about what this isn't, just to be absolutely clear, because there have been all sorts of rumours running around. This is not an abandoning of the parish system. Please believe me when I say that. The aim is that